and welcome to Extra, your weekly LGBTQIA+ news roundup in which I serve you all the tea on current events so that you don't have to do the deep diving yourself. Today, we've got politics, we've got culture, and we've got sports, which is quite a doozy today, so stay tuned. And as always, we'll be finishing off with our two awards, the Slay and the Ew of the week. If this is your first time joining me, thank you so much. I hope you enjoy this video. If you do, please like and subscribe. And without further ado, let's get into it. Japan is moving towards diversity, progression, and LGBTQ+ acceptance. The Japanese Supreme Court has ruled that an existing law which requires transgender people to be sterilized in order to be able to change their gender markers on any official documentation to be unconstitutional. Let's take a moment to talk about what that actually means. A law that requires transgender people to get sterilized in order to be recognized as their authentic gender means that these people have been forced to undergo medical procedures, surgeries, which render them infertile. In my eyes, that's a form of bodily mutilation. It is robbing these people of ever having their own biological family, which undoubtedly sends the message that, in the eyes of the Japanese law, transgender people have been somehow lesser than your average citizen who is allowed to procreate and start a family.
Look at me! Never let the bastards get you down.
I think it's barbaric that such a law has been enforced in Japan for over 20 years. And while Japan still has a long road ahead in terms of diversity and inclusion, Japan, for example, does not recognize same-sex marriage, and conversion therapy is still very much legal. This is a brilliant first step in the right direction. The Nigerian police has arrested 76 people about a week ago who were attending a party which was believed to be a queer person's birthday / a gay wedding in disguise.
Find out if there's a way to tell by just looking at them.
It's a really dangerous situation for queer people in Nigeria because not only are they being targeted often without proof and only on suspicion or word of mouth or whatever it is, but also actual criminals who may have caused others bodily harm or committed violent crimes. As soon as they mention that their victim is a homosexual, often the police lose interest in the case because in their eyes, homosexuals, gay people, queer people somehow deserve what they're getting. And so real criminals don't get persecuted because the harm they've caused was against a queer person. And so it kind of doesn't count.
Ew.
All of that is incredibly problematic. Lots of Nigerians are fleeing the country because of that, leaving their families behind. And I think it's important to talk about because Africa is a huge continent full of lots of incredibly different, diverse nations with different cultures, and we often don't hear about them as much in Western media. I said this in the last video, queer people exist everywhere, regardless of the country's religion or law or culture or whatever. So we should talk about queer people everywhere. Next, we will shimmy on down to South Africa, specifically the Johannesburg Pride Parade, which this year was dedicated to all Africans who cannot march for themselves because of their country's political stance on gay rights, and specifically dedicated to the people of Uganda. The Ugandan government introduced a new bill in May this year, so roughly 6 months ago now, which has made homosexuality punishable by a lifetime imprisonment and also differentiates between what they call aggravated homosexuality. The Ugandan government has defined aggravated homosexuality as engaging in sexual activities with people who are disabled, have mental health issues, are HIV positive, or are over 75 years of age. All of which leaves me with a really big disability and mental health issues both are wide spectrums, which don't necessarily render a person unable or unfit of engaging in sexual activities. If we define mental health issues as depression and anxiety, then about, 25% of the population are affected by that. And the same goes for people above 75 years of age. Maybe they don't want to have sex anymore at that point, but why shouldn't they be allowed to? And just as problematic is the whole thing about HIV positive people, because not only are there medications now, which if taken properly mean that the virus is not transmittable, not detectable, not only will this inclusion in this bizarre and horrific law mean that stigma against HIV will keep getting reinforced and the people affected will keep suffering and being discriminated against. And just none of this law makes any sense to me. I find especially the mental health part of it really difficult to prove or define in any concrete terms. Needless to say, lots of Ugandans are feeling the need to leave their home country and move to more liberal-leaning countries in Africa in order to live authentically and be able to have a relationship and start a family, such as South Africa, which remains the only African nation to have legalized same-sex marriage. A South Korean court has ruled to uphold an existing military law which forbids same-sex relations within the armed forces, meaning anyone serving in the military, soldiers, etc., are not allowed to engage in same-sex relationships/activities, and if they do, might be faced with up to 2 years in prison. This is especially problematic, seeing as adult men over the age of 18 in South Korea are required to serve in the military for between 18 and 21 months. And so any gay people are basically forced to remain abstinent in this time or risk facing 2 years in prison. The court in question has stated that their decision is based on the fact that they worry anyone engaging in gay sex might get distracted and it might weaken their military power in some way, which confuses me because what can gay sex do that straight sex can't? In terms of confusing and distracting people, because aren't there also women in the military? But also at this point should be mentioned that South Korea, as it is right now at early November 2023, has no laws that protect LGBTQ plus people from discrimination, does not recognize gay marriage. Queer couples in South Korea can't adopt children together. So South Korea, as one of the strongest economies in Asia and often presents itself really westernized, still has a long way to go when it comes to diversity and inclusion and protecting queer people. An organization called Transgender Europe has released its 2023 trans rights map, which has revealed that the UK is one of Europe's worst countries to be trans in. Surprise, surprise! Transgender Europe have assessed 30 criteria in all of the countries that they've looked at, and out of these 30 criteria, the UK hits 14.25 points, meaning the UK did not even score 50%. I find this particularly shocking because the UK has long been a safe haven, even within Europe, for queer people, and more recently has been on a bit of a backwards journey, which is no surprise when you consider that the Conservatives have been in power for, 14 years, and this strange anti-trans debate and sentiment that's been perpetuated by our politicians has been rampant recently.
Oh, I'm sorry. Were you raised in a household with no consequences?
Just to give you a feel for all of the countries which are now more progressive, more liberal, and more trans-friendly than the UK, I'm going to read out all of the ones that are ahead of the UK in this study. Are you ready? Norway, Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, Greece, and Estonia. That is 17 17 countries that are ahead of the UK when it comes to protecting trans people.
Why are you the way that you are?
And, of course, the highest ranking country of them all, which I didn't even include in the list just now, is Iceland, which scored 26 out of 30 points. And we're rounding off our politics segment in today's video by celebrating Taiwan's Pride Parade, which is Asia's biggest Pride Parade. And this year was attended by over 176,000 people celebrating their queerness and life. And lots of these 176,000 people were tourists visiting from other Asian countries, much like the Johannesburg Pride, which was attended by people from other African nations in order to be able to be their authentic selves. People from Asian countries, which are less progressive and less liberal than Taiwan, also traveled to Taiwan for Pride. Moving on to our culture segment. Andrew Lumsden, one of the co-founders of the Gay Liberation Front, has died aged 82. Andrew was very much part of the group of people that introduced the movements which normalized homosexuality in our society. There's an interview in which he talks about how he remembers the term gay first being used to describe homosexual people to replace queer, because queer at the time was seen as a slur, as something derogatory, and how he remembers gay people choosing the word gay for themselves because at the time it meant happy and camp and flamboyant and all of the lovely things, and how people at the time were pissed that they couldn't say, or they felt that they couldn't say gay anymore to describe happy events because now it meant something else. We have Andrew and people like Andrew to thank for pride marches, for lots of overturning of anti-gay laws in the UK and in Europe. A lot of the things that we take for granted nowadays, who did the hard work early on. And now moving on to sports. In light of the recent trend of many sporting bodies excluding trans people and especially trans women from competing under the gender with which they identify, UN experts have called on governing and sporting bodies to rethink this decision and move towards making sports more inclusive and more diverse, explaining how sports are a huge cultural thing. Sporting events are attended by hundreds of thousands of people every single day in every single country. Sports are not only about the people who compete in them, but also about the people watching sports, and excluding trans people and trans women sends a message to the population and shapes the culture. The trans population and the number of trans athletes is so small overall that this is barely an issue, and it's being blown out of proportion so much. It's just part of this anti-trans movement and rampage that we are experiencing as a Western society currently. And in my opinion, it is not only unnecessary, but also nothing but harmful. The final thing I want to talk about in sports today is the fact that Saudi Arabia will be hosting the 2032 Men's FIFA World Cup. Australia was the other bidding country. They withdrew their bid a few days ago, making the decision that Saudi Arabia will be the hosting country in 2032. And this is problematic for many, many reasons. First off, there was a lot of backlash about Qatar hosting, specifically regarding lots of their laws around LGBTQIA plus issues. A lot of Westerners saw this as us trying to tell countries with a fundamentally different culture than ours how to do the right thing. I don't want to be part of that at all. What I do want to talk about is the fact that in both Qatar and Saudi Arabia, homosexuality is punishable by death. Aside from the queer community, women's rights are a huge issue in lots of Arab countries, Saudi Arabia and Qatar specifically, very much. Both countries operate under Sharia law, which is fundamentally misogynistic and strips women of quite fundamental rights. And lastly, both of these countries have huge issues with modern-day slavery. Walk Free, an organization that looks into modern-day slavery, found out that roughly 740,000 people in Saudi Arabia are working in what is considered modern-day slavery arrangements on any given day, which is roughly 2% of the Saudi Arabian population. So 2 out of 100 people, or 20 out of 1,000, have lost their freedom, their personal freedom. And with those numbers, Saudi Arabia has the highest prevalence of modern-day slavery in the Arab world and the 4th highest in the world. Sporting events such as the FIFA World Cup, which is in fact the most watched international sporting event in the world, will mean all of the renewal of infrastructure and building stadiums and preparing for this event, and the wealth, the extreme wealth that these countries have, is built on other people's suffering. People living in extreme poverty as modern-day slaves, where people are being stoned for being gay. It is extremely problematic that FIFA are giving countries like that such a huge platform and such a huge advertising channel, because that's essentially what it is. There are lots of articles that talk about how hosting doesn't really come with monetary gain because the amount of money it costs to be able to put on that event in the first place. But what you do get is the opportunity to present yourself to the world and make a case for future tourism and just show the world how great of a country you are. In the cases of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, a lot of their laws don't align with fundamental international human rights laws.
Let's go. I've had enough waking hours for one day.
Which brings us to our awards segment. As always, we have the Slay of the Week, and we also have an Ew of the Week. Staying with Saudi Arabia and FIFA for a little bit, unsurprisingly, the Ew of the Week goes to FIFA for promoting countries which continue to enforce capital punishment.
No!
Which continue to disregard basic human rights.
No!
And which continue to engage in modern-day slavery.
No!
You have so much power, and it is not really news to anybody, I don't think, that FIFA is deeply corrupt. But when you have such a big platform and so much money and so much power, I feel you have a responsibility to use that power for good, or at least for neutral. That's just how I feel. But so that we can end this video on a positive note, the Slay of the Week goes to the people of Johannesburg for using their Pride Parade not only to celebrate their own queer people, the South African queer community, but also for extending their platform and their love to Africans all over the continent who aren't able to march for themselves in their home countries, for embracing queer Africans everywhere, spreading the love and giving a voice to those who aren't able to use it currently. And with that, we've reached the end of this week's video. Thank you so much for watching until the very end. All of my sources are in the description. I also always include mental health resources at the bottom, so please have a look through those if it feels relevant to you. And if you liked this video, please subscribe, watch my previous videos, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.